Thank you for joining me on my serialized podcast, 9 Lives. It's a collection of true stories about my life adventures, risk-taking, and near-death experiences. 9 Lives covers a timeline of 40 years, from 1960 up to the year 2000. I invite you to join me in this series of true and incredible accounts of thrilling adventures and more than a few occasions when it all might have ended for me. In this episode, I'll describe an incident that occurred during our time in Ethiopia in 1965. I call it Trouble at the Rift Valley. The Rift Valley is a spectacular natural wonder where the height of the Ethiopian plateau drops down 2,000 to 3,000 feet to the Rift Valley below, where the Blue Nile meanders through Ethiopia until it joins up with the White Nile in Sudan. About 70 miles north of Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, there's an amazing lookout where visitors can look down the entire 3,000 feet to the valley below, and with a set of good binoculars, you can see a whole range of wildlife, from leopards, cheetahs, elephants, lions, giraffes and rhinoceros, and many more. It was a place that we would regularly take international visitors to on their first visit to Ethiopia. The 70-mile drive from Addis Ababa to the Rift Valley observation point took about a couple of hours, as the last 10 miles of the journey was on very rough road. On one occasion, we had a visitor from England. He represented a company that supplied television equipment to us. During his first short visit to Ethiopia, we suggested a trip to the Rift Valley. Showing a little trepidation, he agreed. We decided to go there over the weekend, and it was a bright, sunny, and yet very cool day. We packed a lunch basket, and together with my wife and our visitor from the UK, we set out for the Rift Valley. It's a pleasant drive, for most part on good paved roads, lined with eucalyptus trees, the smell of which you can never forget. The eucalyptus tree is not native to Ethiopia and was brought from Australia during the reign of King Menelik in the 1800s. It became a dominant species of tree in Ethiopia. At about the 60-mile marker, the paved road took a left turn to the northwest, leaving an unpaved, rather rough road for another 10 miles to reach the Rift Valley observation point. This slowed us down significantly, to about 10 miles an hour. I'd been on this road many times, and had noticed what looked like a farming operation to the west of the road, at what appeared to be about a mile away. It appeared lush and well-tended, and I would soon find out the reason for that. In a couple of minutes or so, we reached the observation platform to observe that spectacular 3,000-foot drop to the Rift Valley below. Our friend from the UK was overwhelmed with the beauty, particularly when we handed him a set of field glasses, and he could not believe the amount of wildlife that there was there on the floor of the Rift Valley, most of which he'd only seen in a zoo. But this was true nature at play. We found a nice spot to picnic, opened the basket of goodies, and had our lunch in one of the most spectacular places on earth. After an hour, it was time to get going and set back to Addis Ababa, 70 miles away. We packed up the car and started off back down that rough road. In less than half a mile, I could smell petrol fumes, and to my alarm, when I looked at the fuel gauge, it was simply dropping whilst I was looking at it. Within 30 seconds, it had dropped to 0. At first, I thought it was simply a faulty gauge, but the smell of gasoline suggested otherwise, which it was, and suddenly the car came to a stop. Looking under the car, I could see that we'd lost the plug in the gas tank. So, what to do when you're 70 miles from home with a disabled vehicle, and there's no AAA to ask for assistance? Looking around, my attention was drawn to the clearing that looked like a farm, and there was smoke coming from what looked like a house, and I'd noticed that there was a road leading from the rough road to this isolated property. So, with my wife at the wheel, my now astounded visitor and myself pushed the car the 1 mile to the property. As we got closer, we noticed how well cultivated it was. There was a large brick-built house with an immaculately manicured large lawn, on which there were sitting a few people. It looked like a typical English tea garden. The time was now about 3 p.m. On reaching the house, we were greeted by a tall, rather rugged gentleman, who said, "I bet you put a hole in your gas tank on that rough road, didn't you?" He said, "It's happened before." And after introducing ourselves and our friend from England, he said, "Come in and have a cup of tea while we figure out what to do." He led us through the house and onto the garden, where several young ladies from a local village were sitting around an elegant middle-aged lady who was teaching the girls how to crochet and how to knit. My wife immediately engaged with the group, as she herself was accomplished in knitting and crocheting. How amazing was that, to find what could have been any typical English garden sitting in the highlands of Ethiopia. There's an amazing story how that came to be, and I'll get to that a little later. But now, down to the problem of fixing the gas tank and getting home back to Addis Ababa. Our host had an amazing garage, with just about every tool and every fixture you can imagine. Very soon, we had the car up on blocks, and there was the problem. The drain plug from the gas tank had disappeared. So with little ado, our host found a large bolt that actually fitted the screw thread of the original plug. This seemed like miracle after miracle. He also said, "I keep gas on hand for these kind of events. Either strangers run out of gas when they come up here, but I've yet to see another example of your problem." He offered to fill our tank with 5 gallons of gas, which was more than enough to get back to Addis Ababa. However, he had one request, that we return as soon as possible with a 5-gallon can of gas to replenish his supply. That we agreed to do the following day. By this time it was around 6 p.m., and it would take us 2 hours to get back to Addis Ababa, and with a bit of luck, we'd make it back there before dark, which is exactly what happened. We arrived home around 7:30 and delivered our overwhelmed guest back to his hotel. I'm told from friends who knew him, when he returned to England, this was a constant dinner-time story. We had, however, promised to deliver 5 gallons of gas back to our host the following day. This time, I opted to take a Land Rover back up there. Definitely a better vehicle for the terrain than my family car. My wife accompanied me because she wanted to talk more to the lady of the house, and I wanted to know more about the history that brought this amazing couple to the highlands of Ethiopia. It all started during World War II, when the Italian military had overrun Ethiopia, and Mussolini declared Ethiopia an Italian province. In 1941, during World War II, a British-led coalition of forces overran the Italians, and Emperor Haile Selassie returned to Ethiopia, and British forces remained for some years through an Anglo-Ethiopian agreement to re-establish its socio-political structure, following the ousting of the Italian forces. I found out that our host had played a key role in ousting the Italians as a colonel leading a coalition force. He had remained there after the war for some 25 years and had settled with his wife in this beautiful remote spot where they had cultivated a classical British lifestyle in the absence of the dreary rainy skies of England. They had actually created a thriving business growing strawberries. There were acres and acres of strawberries. The Ethiopian climate is perfect for growing all kinds of berries. What a wonderful experience it was for us who grew up during World War II to meet a true hero of that era and to see what a wonderful life they'd made for themselves and for villagers around them, by developing a piece of Old England in a remote area in the highlands of Ethiopia. Thank you for joining me for episode 7 of 9 Lives, Trouble at the Rift Valley in Ethiopia. Please join me again for episode 8 of 9 Lives for another account of a thrilling adventure that occurred during our international travels.